see that most scholarship about the New Testament and the Bible holds that these Gospels have anonymous writers, right? So I'm just saying, like, how can I trust that these Gospels reflect the actual thoughts and teachings of Jesus when I don't know who wrote them?
Who told you they're anonymous? Let's go with 21st century scholarship and ignore the early history from people like Irenaeus. Do you know Irenaeus?
Yeah.
And who is he?
He was I don't think he was a church father, but I know he was an early.
No, he was a church father. And who was his bishop? Who was his bishop?
I think it was either Polycarp or John.
Okay, Polycarp was his bishop, right? And Polycarp was whose disciple?
John's.
And so when Irenaeus tells you Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark wrote Mark, Luke wrote Luke, John wrote John, and he said he heard it from Polycarp, who heard from the apostles directly, and he died as a martyr. Why would I want to take Bart Ehrman and you? Because I don't think you would die for anything you believe in, because I would think you're a coward like Bart Ehrman, yet this man shed his blood for what he believed. So why should I deny his testimony and follow your scholars, bunch of sissies living in ivory tower, making paychecks to destroy people's faith?
Yeah, so when Polycarp says that John wrote the Gospel of John...
No, I didn't say Polycarp said that. I said Irenaeus said that. Hear me correctly.
You're saying he learned that from Polycarp.
Yes, but Irenaeus said John wrote it, so where did he get it from? Did he get it from your grandmother?
Yeah, I'm saying he got it.
So he did get it from your grandmother? Okay.
Who are these people? For example, we know that Matthew, maybe he was the guy who was collecting taxes.
Maybe
we can
Why maybe?
say that.
Why maybe?
Because when we check some references, it says it was written like many years after. So I think
when you say many years, how many years after?
Time 85 AD.
According to who?
6 years to the death of Jesus.
According to who? Where'd you get that date from?
Like, for example, when you check some references on maybe Wikipedia, something.
It's okay. Wikipedia is not God, not Gabriel, and it's not a prophet. What evidence that it was written 85 AD?
Okay, but then according to you, when was it written?
We have very good evidence. Matthew was written in the 50s, within 20 years of the life of Jesus. And here's the evidence. Even the scholars you're quoting to me, they'll tell you Mark was written first, Matthew, then Luke and Acts. Luke and Acts, when you read the book of Luke and Acts, Acts ends with Paul, Acts 28, Paul is in prison. He's at Rome, he's in prison, he's about to see the emperor of Rome. That's where it ends. Now, here's why that's interesting. That same book of Acts talks about Peter, James, and Paul as the main characters of the book. Peter is the main character of the book. A lot is said about Peter. Then a lot is said about Paul, and then James, the brother of Christ, is mentioned as a very important figure. In the book of Acts, it mentions the death of Stephen, who was a deacon, not very famous. The only reason why we know him is because Acts mentions he was killed. He was the first Shahid for Jesus. He was killed, right?
Yes, Stephen, yeah.
Okay, now, then it mentions in Acts 12, the brother of John, who wrote the Gospel of John, James, was killed by Herod. So now here are two people whose death are mentioned. But the death of Paul is not mentioned. The death of Peter is not mentioned because Peter was crucified in Rome, according to the followers of for example, you have the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, and the Tabi'un, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have in church history the writings of the Tabi'un, the Tabi'un. We have the writings still. Irenaeus, Polycarp, who was a Tabi, Ignatius, Clement of Rome. So I'm just giving you names. You can find them online. Their writings are online in English for free. But pay attention. Peter was crucified. James was thrown from the top of the temple, according to the dates of these events. When we compare what the Tabi'un say, the dates, James was killed around 62 AD. Peter and Paul were killed around 64 to 68 AD. And then the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. If Matthew and Luke Acts were written in 85 AD. That means it's written after the temple was destroyed, after Paul was killed, after Peter was killed, after James was killed. Why then does Acts not mention that Paul was killed, Peter was killed, James was killed, and the temple destroyed if Acts was written after these events in the 80s? Why does it end with Paul in Rome in house arrest, who hasn't even gone to trial before the emperor, when Acts would have mentioned that if that already took place?
Yeah, then it means it was written before his death.
God bless you with a genius mind, Omar. I mean that. You see, means it must have been written before, right? That means it must have been written before 62 AD, before these things happened. But if Acts is before 62 AD, Luke was before Acts. That means Luke would be at least in the 50s. But Matthew is before Luke, and Mark is before Matthew. So now you push the Gospels within the years 40 to 62 AD, within 10 to 20 years of Jesus' resurrection.
Okay.
Do you know why Wikipedia? Let me tell you why Wikipedia and these sources, they say 85 AD. Do you know why?
I don't know.
Because in Matthew, Mark, Luke, Jesus predicts 40 years before it happened, the temple would be destroyed, Jerusalem would be destroyed. So these scholars don't believe in miracles. So they don't believe Jesus could have said it. So that means, according to their logic, Matthew, Mark, Luke must have been written after the temple was destroyed, and then they put in the mouth of Jesus predicting its destruction. In other words, they lied to make it look like a prophecy, but they only knew about the temple being destroyed after it was destroyed.
So it's because they don't believe in miracles.
Man, God has blessed you with a shower. I mean that. See, you got it. But now, if you believe God and believe miracles, believe prophecy, of course Jesus could tell me what's going to happen 40 years before it happens, because God knows the future.
Okay. Yeah. I'm understanding.
Good. I pray God will keep giving you illumination by His Spirit for the glory of Jesus.
So I saw this video by I don't know what his name is, but the video is called Ex-Christian telling the truth about the Bible.
Oh man. Oh, for 2,000 years we didn't know the truth, and this ex-Christian now is going to tell us the truth. Okay, what is the truth?
So it talks about how the four Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, he said that those were written anonymously, and that those didn't come till decades after their lives.
No, they're written anonymously. Oh no! So you mean they have to tell us they wrote it? We can't have their followers and their followers after them accurately passing on the names of the authors? Oh my goodness! This is probably one of the most stupidest objections that anyone can bring up. Number one, by anonymous, if he means that the author doesn't say, I am Mark, the church has known that for 2,000 years. This is nothing new. Just pick up Mark. He doesn't say, I, Mark, wrote it. So that's number one. Number two, the names Matthew, Mark, and Luke comes from the earliest times of the church. In other words, when you go back in church history, because we don't just have the Gospels, we have also the writings of the disciples of the apostles and their companions. I'm going to give you some names. You have Ignatius, Polycarp, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Novatian. These are just some of the many names of early church fathers who either were disciples of the apostles or the disciples of the disciple of an apostle. I'll give you an example. Irenaeus, he was the bishop in Lyons, France, and he got martyred. He was killed for his faith in Jesus Christ. Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp. Polycarp was another Christian who got killed for his faith in Jesus Christ. He was burned alive at the age of 86. You know who Polycarp is?
No. Polycarp?
Yes. You know who he is? I'll tell you. The disciple of the Apostle John. Okay.
Yes, I searched him up. So he was born 69 AD and died February 23rd, 155 AD.
He was 86 years old, Polycarp, right? Okay, Polycarp. Now,
yes.
Follow with what I'm saying. He was a disciple of John. Who was his disciple? Irenaeus. And Irenaeus even mentioned in writing when he was young, he saw John the Apostle. So I don't need John to tell me he wrote the gospel, because when he wrote the gospel, did he write it for himself or for his community?
For to pass it down as the word of God.
And that one of them would be Polycarp, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Polycarp, who's now received the gospel, he's the one telling the people, John wrote this and he entrusted it to the church for us to read. So this is a pathetically bad argument. And even the names of the authorship prove their authenticity. Because when you find false, fake heretics like the Gnostics, when they were making up gospels and trying to get people to believe them, they would actually have an apostle speak as if he's writing. For example, the Gospel of Thomas. There you'll read it says, I, Thomas, am writing these sayings. Now, you see the tactic of deceivers. When they want to deceive you into thinking this comes from an apostle, they'll write in the book and have the apostle identify himself by name that he's the author. You don't find that with the Gospels, do you? Because that tells you they're writing early enough to know that the people that they're writing to know their identity and they don't have to mention who they are. That's number one, okay? The second line of evidence. When forgers forge, they attribute their writing to a prominent figure in the church, just like the Gospel of Thomas. But when it comes to the Gospels, 3 of the Gospels are named after people who are not very prominent in the church. Mark, Luke, and Matthew, they were not prominent figures. They only became famous because the Gospels were attributed to them. So if they're making up names, why say Mark wrote Mark? Why not make up the name Peter and say Peter wrote it? If these books were really anonymous, then you would find some debate regarding who wrote what. In other words, you may find a dispute regarding Matthew. You may find someone saying Matthew wrote it, or someone else saying, no, another person wrote it. Such is not the case. The unanimous testimony from Irenaeus, and even the one who came before him, Papias, cited by Eusebius, the church historian, unanimous testimony, and all of our earliest copies of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that have a superscription. For example, it'll say the gospel according to, unanimously identify Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as the writers of these gospels. There is not a single shred of historical, textual, archaeological evidence that these names were in dispute. All the evidence unanimously has Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. No dispute, no contradiction, no conflict. You see why you need to know your faith? You need to know your Bible and the history associated with the Bible.